Hey folks, Alan Mandic, the Hot Rod Hippie here, coming to you with a C10 build vlog number, I don't know what. The one where we replace the roof. In this video, I'm going to show you what I do when it comes to replacement of a full panel like this. It's a pretty simple and straightforward one where I can demonstrate multiple things people have asked about that I deal with, because once I weld the cap roof on this area is going to be inaccessible in the future, so I need to do some steps between here and there before the new roof gets welded on. I'm also going to be applying POR-15 underneath of here. It's a product that I do not use on a regular basis, nor do I recommend in most scenarios, but it's actually pretty much perfect for this situation. We'll discuss why a little bit more as we go. Let's discuss what happened here. Well, my dad and I were working on this truck last week. We were stripping some of the paint and body filler off of it because I was working on a little bit of last minute dent repair before I went to the wiring and plumbing. Part of that was the roof skin, and when we got to the roof skin, we found in the gutter area rot. And not just a couple of pinholes, I could poke a screwdriver through in various areas. And this leads me to a point that I should have known about this years ago. Do as I say, not as I do here, but I highly recommend you should strip a vehicle like this. If you know you're gonna be doing a full restoration, strip it to bare metal as one of your first steps. That's where your starting point should be. Now I'm toward the end of the project. We're hoping to get this body off to paint and body in the next like 2 weeks, and now I'm replacing an entire roof skin. That is not ideal. My excuse that I have for you is I don't live near my parents. I have been moved away from them for years now, and as such, whenever we worked on this, I had to take weeks of vacation off to go work on this project, and we had to prioritize the time that we had as much as we could. So we just never got around to spending days fully stripping the cab the way we should have. Also, a quick note for you folks, if this looks any different, this video here, I'm actually editing this on my iPad of all things, because one of the fans in my laptop legitimately exploded. Once we found the rust on this thing, it was time to start working on it. Trying to repair in the gutter areas, I've done it in the past, but more often than not, what you're seeing is only a tip of the iceberg. It's the symptom of the full-on disease that you have going on, the rot, the cancer in there, and we have to address that. So I went ahead and I attacked this thing and I fully cut off the roof skin of this thing. Actually on like 1 a.m. on a Friday night is when I did it. I was working on other stuff, but I couldn't sleep until I cut this off to get it to there and see what was underneath of it. Then once I had the skin off, it was my dad's turn. He came out here with a wire brush and started knocking some of the surface rust off under here. A good first step to start seeing what we're dealing with and cleaning things up. The way that I actually removed the skin of this roof is a method that I like to employ fairly often. And that is I actually took a cutoff wheel and I left the flange of the roof skin in place and just cut the rest of it off. That means that all I had left on the roof skin was the flange left over welded to the actual cab itself. This gives me much easier access to the spot welds and to be able to cut and break them off of the vehicle, which my dad then undertook the job of doing. Once we got the flange off of there, it's time to go around and dress up any little areas that need some attention, a little bit of welding. Some flanges could use a little crack repair from when my dad cut the spot welds. They just tore a little bit here and there. Minor stuff that does happen from time to time. We also need to devote some more time to cleaning up the surface rust. As much as I can clean this up, as much as I can knock that stuff down and get rid of it, is going to help in the long run. We are going to be applying POR-15, but personally, I do not think that POR-15 is a catch-all, save rusty metal type of product. I understand that's basically what it's billed as, but I don't buy into it wholeheartedly. I think that the perfect situation for POR-15 is something like this, where you have surface rust, you have some slightly deeper spots of rust, but you're gonna do your best to clean them up as you can. You're gonna hit them with a wire wheel, Scotch-Brite disc, stuff like that. Just clean this up as much as you can before you apply the POR-15. In this situation, I could really spend days on this and really clean it up and probably primer it and paint it and do a better job in the long run, but I just don't have a time frame available to me, so POR is gonna have to work here. And this stuff does work. I'm not saying it's a bad product by any means. I just don't think that it's a really strong repair job for every situation. A lot of people seem to think that, oh, I got rusty, scaly shit here. I'm just gonna apply POR-15. That's gonna get the job done. You're pushing it with that. I prefer to use it in a situation like this, surface rust, where I just can't clean it up as much as I would like to. So I'll use it here, and now this will be cleaned up for the long run. The other benefit that we're gonna have here is I want sound deadening in here. Now the interior of this cab is all metal, but I don't want this thing to sound like a rattly, annoying rattle trap going down the road. Originally, it did have a panel in the middle, a piece of sound deadening between the outer skin and the inner skin, and just one section of it. Now what I'm going to do is, with the POR-15 applied across this entire roof, that's thicker than paint and just primer, so that itself will function as a bit of a sound deadener. After we apply the POR-15, we apply some sound deadener on there as well. It's going to go between the outer and the inner skin, more than was on there originally, to help knock down noise on this thing so that the truck can be quieter and sound better riding down the road. Now I also went ahead and did something that I mentioned in some of the previous vlogs. I actually drilled in between the existing spot welds holding this roof inner structure to this back window area, and I reinforced it. I welded them up more thoroughly. I also did so where some of this B pillar comes up and meets the roof skin. I'm trying to reinforce this and make it stronger than it ever was from the factory, or at the very least just make it better than it was when I got to it. Some of these spot welds are, like I've said numerous times, they shrink over time, and I'm just trying to make their job easier so there are more welds holding us all together. Reinforcing areas like that, making sure that those joints where they're coming together are strong with good spot welds in there, that's how you get the vehicle to not creak and rattle going down the road. These are the areas that are going to give and move against each other as a vehicle drives that cause those squeaks and rattles that are so known in a lot of classic cars. We can reinforce that by methods like this and knock down on that noise ever occurring. I always attack a vehicle with the mindset that I want it to be better than it was when I got to it, if not better than it was when it rolled out of the factory. While the skin is off, before I fit the new one is a perfect time to go around the outside edge of this thing and clean up this edge flange. This gutter has this standing flange that's going to exist on this truck when we're all said and done. Getting it as smooth and straight as I can now is going to make my life easier. It means that I'll both be fitting the new panel to the proper structure the way I want it to be, but it also just means that it's a whole lot easier. Once the roof skin is in my way, I wouldn't be able to hammer in this area like I am here. After I tuned up the flanges on the actual cab side of things, I made sure that was all where I wanted to be and smoothed out. It's time to actually mock up the skin on the truck. I want to go ahead and make sure that I get the actual skin mocked up on here so I can check the fit. We don't want to be doing this later once we cross the bridge and, oh no, now it's too late to modify things. Now is the time to check this, make sure it doesn't need any trimming, modification, and honestly, this thing is probably the best fitting panel I've ever worked with. I am not exaggerating. It needed one minor, like 32nd to a 16th trim off of one corner just to get it to fit. Now don't get me wrong, it fits very tightly within this structure, but I'm happy with that. I want it to fit tightly. I don't want it to be sloppy or have to make up edges or extend flanges. None of that. I do have to force it a little bit to get it where I want it to be, but I'm okay with that. Right now, my dad's working on getting the underside of the new roof skin actually primered. That black e-coat that comes on panels like that, so many people ignore it and they figure, oh, it's already primed. What do I need to do? That is great for shipping, and you can scuff it, and you can prime it, and you can do a lot of things with it, but it is not an overall rust preventative. It is not going to last long term on the inside of a panel. I've seen so many classic restorations, stuff from the 90s, early 2000s, where it's already starting to rust in areas because all they did is left that black e-coat on there and walked away. Since it's my goal to make this thing better than it was, we're gonna go ahead and self-etch primer that thing, and then we're gonna paint the underside of it as well, so it's got rust prevention on top of rust prevention in there. There's no reason to risk it in the future. Before we start applying the POR-15, we have to use the POR metal etching, metal cleaner, which is basically just kind of a rust converter / metal etch that goes on before the POR-15. You have to do this and follow the instructions. You have to wipe it down with water afterward. This is one of the reasons that I don't necessarily love POR-15 is the preparation work that goes into it. In my opinion, to do it correctly is a lot more than people seem to realize. But now it's time to start putting it on. Also, POR is extremely messy. It's one of the reasons I don't like it. Applying it is a nightmare. In fact, I've got a temporary tattoo now on my elbow of POR-15, and that'll be there until that skin goes away. So it's annoying. Another reason I don't particularly love this stuff is it gets rock hard once it dries. So if this thing ever needs some repair work to that inner structure, maybe it gets T-boned and it's repairable and this thing could be salvaged, trying to fix those panels after the POR is applied is just going to be a complete nightmare. But in the realm of what we're doing here, this kind of makes sense. The inner structure on this truck was rustier than I'd like to see, but to replace it, to repair it the way that really I would love to do, would almost mean chopping the entire top of this cab off to get in there and get to everything, and then it's just not in the cards. What we did here was salvage the best that we could and make it last a lot longer than it would otherwise. I will always recommend replacing metal if you can. This was just a scenario where it just did not make sense. It wasn't gonna happen in this truck. We worked into the night to get the POR applied on there. It was like 9:30 until we got back into the house. So that had a good chance to dry overnight. They say 2 to 6 hours to dry. We're in a climate controlled garage, which is probably assisting in the drying process, but I didn't want to risk it. I let it go for overnight. When we came in the morning, it was good and set up, ready to go. Originally, this truck had a matte pad, like the fiberboard pad you find inside a door skin sometimes, for a sound deadener on the roof panel. We removed that, of course, while looking for rust and cleaning up the surface rust on this thing. So we replaced it on this truck with a larger piece of Dynamat Extreme. This larger piece of Dynamat covers more of the roof, which will act as a better sound deadener than the original stuff would have either way, and also function as a bit of a thermal insulator. Here in North Carolina, in the summer heat, he's gonna have AC in this thing. Helping that AC not have to fight harder is just, it's a good idea. Now you might notice that the flange on the roof skin and the flange on the truck side are both bare metal. That is key. The panel bond is meant to grip to the metal, not to a primer or something like that. You need a rough surface. It wants to be like a 36 grit, 50 grit, roughed up surface on this thing. So even taking some like sandpaper by hand and just scuffing that before you put the panel bonding on there is a good idea in this situation. To give the panel bond a good chance to hold and add structural strength to this thing, I did weld as well. Every 8 inches I drilled holes for spot welds, as well as additional tighter grouped ones in the corners at all 4 corners of the panel, just trying to give it the best chance to be strong and corrosion free down the road. You can use panel bond and welding in conjunction with each other, and spot welding would actually be preferred, an actual resistance spot welder. Unfortunately, I just don't have one, so I had to use a MIG welder on this project. What you need to do is avoid getting the panel bond into the area where you're actually going to spot weld. So for me, I use little pieces of tape and put them on the spot weld areas so that the panel bond didn't get into those spots. You might note it would have been easier for me to just take a hand punch and punch the flange on the new roof skin for spot welding. However, there's a couple of reasons why I didn't do that. One is that I would have been welding through the new panel into the old metal, and that's not ideal. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody loves to throw around the phrase, oh, they don't build them like they used to, and my response is always good. Now, I wasn't around 55 years ago when this truck hit the road, so maybe the metal was really good then, but now it's just not. It's got impurities, it's got a little bit of rust in there, there's just something about it that is not going to weld nearly as nicely as the new metal will. So I would prefer to weld into the new metal and through the old metal so that I'm more so focusing on the new metal than the old. The other reason that I wanted to do this is, yes, it made it more difficult. Having to weld up underneath of that flange on the existing metal meant that I'm fighting gravity with all of my spot welds. That's not ideal. There is a reason for that though. This truck, when it's sitting here, I'm 6 foot 1 inch tall, and I'm over top of this truck, and it's not fully laid out where it's sitting right now. So when this thing's at a car show, the average adult is going to be able to see over the roof of this thing. So I want the flange inside of that drip rail area to be as clean as we can get it. I don't want to have to get down in there and try and grind spot welds into that recessed little 3/8 inch wide lip. That's just not going to happen in a clean manner without digging into the base material. It's never going to be quite right. Welding up underneath into the metal gives me such a cleaner look on the top edge of this thing. Once we had that all taped off, we just had to go around. I applied a thin coat of panel bond to the actual roof skin itself. You want it on both sides so it starts biting into both sides of the material as quickly as it can, and then the two will join together when you apply them. This stuff only has a 90-minute work time, meaning that from the time you start to apply it till the time it's cured to the point where you can't work with it any further is 90 minutes. You have to work on a timetable when you're doing this. That means cleaning everything you need, preparing everything you can, getting your clamps ready, because you need to clamp the heck out of this stuff. We got as many clamps as we could round up and then went and bought some more because we needed them to get this panel on here strong the way it needs to be. Personally, I own dozens of vice grip clamps, and this is one of the reasons that I do. You need them for a situation like this. My dad did a great step. He took all the vice grips and he lined them up right next to the truck in an easy to grab spot, so we had them ready to go when we started working on this thing. We weren't searching around for the one missing vice grip, last one we need. He got them all ready, lined up, so we were ready to go. My dad and I worked together. We both got this thing lined up and onto this truck. It is a tight fit onto this thing. It really fits and squeezes inside of the flange on this truck. I had to make one very minor trim on a corner to get it seated in there just right. But I did find that putting a wedge in the middle back of the panel, kind of bow it up and then force it all down in there, really seemed to help. And it kind of feels like it's created some structure. This thing is really tight in there, and I think that's a good fit in my opinion. Then it was as simple as going around and clamping in between all of the spot welds. To start with, I clamped right next to the holes where I was going to be spot welding, so that when I went in there with the welder, I had metal to metal ready to go ahead and weld. Once I was done with the spot welds, I welded all the way around the top of this thing. We moved all of the clamps to dead middle between the spot welds so that the clamps were focused and working on the areas where the panel bond adhesive was going to be, giving it the best chance that it could. As I said, you only have a 90-minute work time, but in the areas around the welds, since you're heating that metal up rapidly, you're actually cutting that work time down in those areas. You need to work quickly when you're doing this kind of stuff. After we got the clamps in place, we went around with a rag with some wax and grease remover on it and wiped out any excess that was squeezing out between the two panels. This is going to function as both a seam sealer in a way. We will further seam seal down the road, but it's functioning in that way, but it's also just so we can get the excess out of there and we're not making a mess. Like I said, I want this to be as clean as I can get it. So I don't want to have globs of this stuff left over when I'm all said and done. And once it cures, it gets very hard, so removing it later would not be ideal. Get rid of it while you can right now. You only need to leave the panel bonded panel clamped for about 4 hours with the specific product that we're using. Each panel bond product has its own specific timetables you've got to work with. However, we left the clamps on this thing overnight. Now we've got a good, solid, new, fresh piece of metal on the roof of this truck, so body working should be simpler. We just have a better finished product than we ever would have had otherwise. I sat down to edit this video and I realized I really didn't summarize panel bond and why I used it here. I mentioned the clean aesthetic, and that is definitely one of the key reasons that we used it, but there's more to it than that. Also, the seam sealing aspect is the thing. Not only do I mean sealing up this gutter because it's squished into there, we had to wipe that out of there, so it functions as a seam sealer in that respect, but on the inside seam as well. The moisture that was rotting this out from the inside out previously, like that mouse nest that was in there, we're not going to have to worry about that nearly as much now because this actually squishes in there, and we didn't wipe it out from the inside. We couldn't get to that. So there's a bead of this stuff all the way around this thing on the inside edge that's squished out from the actual joint outward. It's pushing out the moisture and the oxygen from directly against that connection, so it should last for a longer time. Part of clamping is not just clamping it for structure and so that it can cure in the tight position, but it's also to push the oxygen out from in between there, push the air pockets out so that this gets good and sealed all the way around and you don't have to worry about this thing rotting later on. And the last reason was ease of use. I know I harped on a little bit there about how you have limited time, you've got to work, and that is stressful. There's no doubt about that. But the thing about it is, once the stress of getting it all clamped up is done, that's it. You walk away and you let it do its thing and you're all ready to go. I welded this thing every 8 inches as well as a couple additional ones in various locations. That's 33 welds on this roof. That is a quarter the number of welds that I would have done on this thing if I was purely welding it on. So I saved myself a lot of welding, a lot of chances for the welds to go wrong, because welding overhead with the little MIG welder that I'm using, that's a lot of chances for me to not have the best welds on this thing and to screw up as I'm doing it. This panel bond allowed me to cut that out of the process. There's a surprising amount of structure to this body, and this is a point that I should make, that this stuff is not, it is a structural adhesive and it will be strong and it will serve a great purpose on a lot of vehicles, but you have to be careful about where you use it. I wouldn't use it to put an entire body together. You're going to want to kind of figure out the less structural locations, the areas where you're not relying on it as heavily to hold everything together. While it is strong, I'm not going to say that I trust it to hold the entire body together. This piece, however, this is structural, of course, to the body, but I really felt like the inner structure, when I really got to look at it, was doing more for the structure of this thing. There's some heavy metal in there, some 14 gauge and even maybe some 12 gauge in the corners for braces holding this thing together. The skin is, of course, part of the structure, but not all of it. So I could have probably gotten away with fully panel bonding this on. I can't get away from welding at least a little bit on something like this. The actual product that we used in this situation is this 2-part stuff, dual mix. It is SEM multi-purpose panel adhesive. I'll throw a link in the description down below. You can check this stuff out for yourself if you're interested. You do need this special 2-part epoxy gun for it, this dual mix gun. But this is a really handy thing to have if you're doing a lot of auto restoration or customization, because a lot of these adhesives and products nowadays come in this form factor of this tube design. Seam sealers, panel bonds, there's various products that do come in this way that you might be interested in using. You'll need that gun for it. All right, folks, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. I thought it might be interesting to show you this kind of newer type of technique that I use on classic restorations and have been doing for years. I like to keep up with the times. People ask me about using lead. I don't use it because we have products nowadays that are better than lead. I don't see any reason to, unless you're trying to recreate exactly how something was before. Stuff like this is exactly the type of thing that I'm talking about. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please go ahead and drop it a like. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of this? What do you think of panel bonding? What do you think of replacing the roof on this? Did you find this video interesting? Let me know in the comments down below. Check out the Patreon account, patreon.com/HotRodHippie, that directly supports this channel. Help me get the fans replaced in my laptop so I can edit more videos for you folks, and get subscribed to keep up to date with all the Hot Rod Hippie content. Thanks for coming around, folks.